note. Now, clientelism is I would say, a feature of virtually every poor democracy that has ever existed in the world. So if you go to Brazil or Mexico or Indonesia or India, clientelism and the associated forms of corruption are practiced very broadly. This is how political machines get ordinary voters to vote for them. I, however, would argue that it should not be regarded as a pure form of corruption, where comparable to, say, an education minister pocketing, $50 million and just putting it in a bank account in Switzerland for the benefit of his family. Because clientelism actually does involve a reciprocal exchange of favors, so that the politician actually has to give something back to the voters, even if it is, in effect, an individual bribe. So there is a degree of reciprocity. And I think what I'm going to argue is that clientelism actually arose and should be more properly regarded not simply as a form of corruption, but as an early stage of democratic mobilization. That in societies with low levels of education and wealth, that this is actually the most efficient way to get people to the polls, because most voters in such societies actually aren't, they don't care about global warming or, trade talks with Japan or, kinds of public policy issues that more developed countries worry about. They worry about, am I going to have food on the table for my family? And if the politician can give them the Christmas turkey or the get out of jail card for their cousin or whatever, that's the basis on which they're going to vote. And we tend to look down on countries with these clientelistic systems and say, well, they just don't understand how a proper democracy, that you're supposed to vote on programmatic issues for candidates that lay out, general public policy positions and define themselves more by ideology and less by these personal exchange of favors. But we don't understand that this is exactly the way that American politics worked through the better part of the 19th century. So here starts the history lesson. So if you look at what the American government looked like in the years after the signing of the Constitution, the ratification of the Constitution, you could describe it basically as government by the friends of George Washington, meaning that the federal government, to the extent that it existed at all, there were mostly customs inspectors, some postmasters, some leaders of local militias, this sort of thing. To the extent that it existed at all, most of the leaders were actually elites of that time, and a lot of them graduates of places like Harvard and Yale and Princeton. But the principle of equality was deeply embedded in the Declaration of Independence, and the United States was one of the first countries in the world to open up the franchise, and many states began to do this in the 1820s. And the critical election was really the election of 1828 that brought Andrew Jackson to power, because this was the first election in which a majority of states voted, with a universal male franchise. This is really the first country anywhere in the world that implemented a universal male franchise. And this led to the need, first of all, for political parties, because all of a sudden, instead of these elite factions, and that's basically what the Federalist Party was, you had these new parties that had to come into being in order to get people to the polls, and there was this recognition that the easiest way to motivate people to vote was actually to bribe them individually. So in the 1828 election, it featured Andrew Jackson against John Quincy Adams. This was a classic polarity in American politics. John Quincy Adams was a Harvard graduate. He had traveled in Europe. He could speak many European languages. His father was the second president of the United States, so a classic Boston Brahmin. Andrew Jackson was a frontiersman. He was a Scotch-Irish, brawler, drinker, Indian fighter. He had almost no formal education. He made his name fighting in the Cherokee and Seminoles, drove the Seminoles out of northern Florida, won the Battle of New Orleans, and as a result of his military successes, ran for president and won in 1828. And when he won, he said two things. He said, first of all, I won the election, so I should get to choose who runs the US government. And second, he didn't put it quite in these terms, but he said it doesn't take a genius to run the American government. And this was a period in which, the average level of education in the United States was probably somewhere, third or fourth grade. I mean, it wasn't even, you couldn't, at this point, not even a majority of Americans even had an elementary school education. And so that meant that if an ordinary American was put in a position of postmaster, customs official, or so forth, they didn't have a whole lot of skill. And this inaugurates this period that is alternatively known as, the spoils system or the patronage system that lasts for about 100 years in American history. And with every passing year after the 1828 election, both the emerging Democratic and Republican parties begin to use this as a means of voter mobilization, so that by the time of the Civil War, virtually every appointed official from the federal government all the way down to local postmasters and Indian reservation managers were all there as a result of a payoff by a politician to some political supporter. And if you read Abraham Lincoln, particularly after he was reelected in 1864, he is just in tears and tearing his hair out at the fact that he has got to deal day after day after day with office seekers who say, I supported you in the election, so you owe me a job, and what are you gonna give me? And in fact, a lot of the early battles that the Union lost was because Lincoln felt compelled to appoint people like Dan Sickles or other political generals who were essentially politicians that could, bring political support in an election, but were completely incompetent military leaders. And it's really only as the war dragged on at huge cost that he realized that merit was actually an important principle for recruiting a general. And that's, finally, it took him several years to find Ulysses Grant and promote him to the top. And this is really the system that existed in the United States into the second half of the 19th century. Okay, so that's the first part of the American